Today we're going to talk about the life of Muhammad and the very early history of Islam during Muhammad's life and just after his life. We will look at the central teachings of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. We'll take a brief look at the Quran, and we'll talk about the major division within Islam, which is the division between the Sunni and the Shia. The darkest orange area indicates the territory in Arabia that came under Islamic control during Muhammad's lifetime, from the Hijra in 622 until his death in 632 CE. The lighter orange area represents the territory brought under Islamic control by 661 CE. The violet area represents the territory under Islamic control by 750 CE. Note that in the east, Islamic conquest under the Umayyad Caliphate reached the Indus River that today flows through central Pakistan, and to the west, the forces of the Caliphate had crossed the Strait of Gibraltar from North Africa into the Iberian Peninsula, conquering Portugal and most of Spain. Their entry into the rest of Europe was prevented by the victory of the Frankish ruler Charles Martel at the Battle of Tours in 732 CE. But what this map essentially shows is that within basically 100 years of Muhammad's death, Islam was a powerful and prominent empire in the world. This map shows the extent of Islam by 1500 CE, about the same time as Columbus's voyages to the New World. Note that Islam's reach extended far north into Eastern and Central Europe and to Central Asia, and into the western edge of China and throughout India, and all the way into the island nations of Malaysia and Indonesia south of China in the Indian Ocean. Indonesia is the largest Islamic nation in the world today by population, with 225 million Muslims in Indonesia. This map shows the extent of Islam in the world today. As you can see, it is a global religion, but its greatest influence is in the Middle East and North Africa. Even though the current Islamic population in North America is very small, around 1 or 2% of the population, Islam may be the fastest growing religion in the United States, and it is the fastest growing religion in the world. It is likely that Islam will overtake Christianity as the world's largest religion before the end of the 21st century. While Allah is the focus and sole authority within Islam, Muhammad's life story is important as a model of Quranic teachings. The story of Muhammad's life is found in the Hadith literature, which represents and reports Muhammad's sayings and actions, and these are called the Sunnah. The Sunni branch of Islam takes its name from the Sunnah, or from the tradition. Muslims consider Muhammad to be the final prophet in a chain of prophets who brought monotheism into the world. Born in about 570 CE in Mecca, during what Muslims call the Age of Ignorance, Muhammad was born into a poor clan of the Quraysh tribe. The Quran, Islam's most sacred book as revealed to Muhammad, traces the ancestry of the Islamic faith to the patriarch Abraham and his son Ishmael, whom he had with the Egyptian slave Hagar. Abraham and Ishmael together built the Kaaba on the site where Allah created Adam. The Kaaba is a shrine at the center of Islam's most sacred mosque. The Kaaba is not itself a mosque. It is a shrine. It is a building in the inner courtyard of a much larger building, the most sacred mosque in all Islam, the Al-Masjid Al-Haram, which is in Mecca. It marks Islam's holiest site. In the side of the Kaaba, there is a black meteorite, believed to be given by the angel Gabriel, or in Arabic, Jibril, and it is set into the corner of the Kaaba. The monotheism established by Abraham was not maintained according to Islamic tradition, and Muslims believe that Allah called Muhammad to restore it. After Muhammad established Islam to restore the pure monotheism of Abraham, the Kaaba became Islam's holiest sanctuary. Now, Muhammad, as a boy, was orphaned. He was very young, and he was raised by his uncle, Abu Talib. His age, his time, was a time of constant warfare between competing tribes in Arabia, and the city of Mecca had used religion to create a very special role for itself as a city of sanctuary and refuge. All of the many gods worshipped by the various tribes of Saudi Arabia were represented in a pantheon of idols that were kept and worshipped in the Kaaba. So the city of Mecca became a neutral zone where all tribal groups agreed to keep the peace so that all were able to come and worship in safety. Consequently, Mecca became an important center of trade and commerce. The city's economy depended upon its status as neutral territory and a place of worship for all the tribes, and that status depended upon the Kaaba as common ground, as a sanctuary where all the tribes had shrines to their various gods. In Mecca during Muhammad's youth, the peace and wealth of the city was intertwined with polytheism. As a young man, Muhammad went to work for a wealthy businesswoman named Khadijah, a distant cousin of his who had grown up in a wealthy household. Before marrying the Prophet Muhammad, Khadijah was widowed twice and had children from both marriages. She hired Muhammad to take her trading caravans to Syria, and she was so impressed by his character and his honesty in dealing with her business that she asked her friend Nafisa to approach Muhammad and ask if he would accept Khadijah's proposal. He said he would. She was 40 years old and he was 25. They were married for 25 years, during which Muhammad was monogamous. After Khadijah's death, Muhammad took other wives and had several wives at the same time. But with Khadijah, Muhammad had 6 children, 2 sons and 4 daughters, but the 2 sons did not survive past childhood. Khadijah was loyal to the Prophet Muhammad and supported him in all aspects of life. Khadijah is respected by all Muslims for her conviction, her love for the Prophet, and her willingness to sacrifice for the faith. She is considered to be one of the great women in the history of Islam and is a role model for all Muslim women. With Khadijah's support, Muhammad increasingly devoted himself to spiritual contemplation. He would often seek out solitary places, such as the cave of Hira, pictured here. This is where the angel Gabriel appeared to Muhammad and began the revelation of the Quran. In the 15th year of Muhammad's marriage to Khadijah, about 610 CE, the Prophet received his first revelation of the Quran from Gabriel. He was terrified by the experience, and he ran from the cave of Hira and went straight to Khadijah and asked her to cover and hide him. Khadijah consoled him and told him that he was in fact a prophet. She became the first person to become Muslim. She was Muhammad's first convert. It was 3 years before Muhammad began preaching publicly. His message was Islam, complete submission to the one true God, Allah. At first, he was ignored and mocked. Eventually, he made a few converts who were mostly outsiders or people of low social status. When he began preaching against polytheism and condemning idolatry, he and his earliest followers were persecuted. His message was contrary to the political and economic interests of the Meccans, and he was condemning the polytheism that was sacred and traditional to them. Ironically, his own tribe were the guardians of the Kaaba, so his message of monotheism was especially offensive to them. The early days of Islam were not easy for the Prophet and his followers. Many of Muhammad's earliest followers were slaves or foreigners, and some of them were tortured and murdered because of their beliefs. In 615, some of Muhammad's followers immigrated to the Ethiopian kingdom of Ashkum and founded a small community under the protection of the Christian Ethiopian emperor, Ashama ibn Abjar. Most of the Muslims returned to Mecca after several years, but they were still persecuted. In 616, the Quraysh tribe, Muhammad's own tribe, declared a trade boycott against Muhammad's clan and against his followers. They attacked, imprisoned, and beat the Muslims, who sometimes went for days without food or drink. Khadijah used her wealth to maintain the community, caring for the needs of the poor and ransoming the captives until the boycott was lifted in late 619 CE. In 619, both Abu Talib, the Prophet's uncle and protector, and Khadijah, who was weakened by the boycott, died. So both his uncle, who had raised him, and his wife died in the same year. This year was called the Year of Sorrows because it was a huge loss for the Prophet. Islamic tradition states that in 620, Muhammad experienced the Isra and Miraj, a miraculous night-long journey said to have occurred with the angel Gabriel. At the journey's beginning, the Isra, he is said to have traveled from Mecca on a winged steed to the farthest mosque. Later, during the Miraj, Muhammad is said to have toured heaven and hell and spoke with earlier prophets such as Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. Islamic historians disagree as to whether this experience was a spiritual experience only, a vision, or whether it was a miraculous physical journey. Some scholars believe that Muhammad traveled from the Kaaba at Mecca through the heavens to the celestial Al-Baytu il-Ma'mur, the heavenly prototype of the Kaaba. But some traditions indicate Muhammad's journey was from Mecca to Jerusalem, where he ascended from the rock where Abraham was said to sacrifice, was supposed to sacrifice Isaac into Allah's presence, and he met the prophets who had preceded him. The Jewish temple had been built over the site of the rock where Abraham was supposed to sacrifice Isaac. If you remember the story from the Old Testament, God commanded Abraham to sacrifice his son. Abraham was faithful and was about to do what God required when God sent the angel Gabriel to stop him and provided a ram for the sacrifice instead of Isaac. The Jewish temple was built over the site of that stone, but as you may remember, the temple itself had been destroyed by the Roman Empire in the year 70 CE. And so on this night journey, the Isra and Miraj, according to some of the traditions, Muhammad traveled from the Kaaba in Mecca to the site of the temple where the ruins of the temple were in Jerusalem, stood on this rock where Abraham was about to sacrifice Isaac, and from there ascended into heaven, met with the prophets, came face to face with God. During the Miraj, Gabriel escorted Muhammad as he ascended through the 7 levels of heaven, meeting different prophets at each stage, the last being Abraham. Then the prophet Muhammad went on alone to meet with Allah without the angel Gabriel. God told Muhammad that people should pray 50 times a day. Muhammad departed, but as Muhammad descended back to earth, he met Moses, who told him to go back to God because 50 prayers per day was too many. Muhammad went back and forth between Moses and God 9 times until the prayers were reduced to the 5 daily prayers that Muslims are supposed to pray today. Moses thought that was still too many and told him to go back and ask for 3 prayers. But Muhammad felt ashamed and said that with fewer than 5, his followers might not perform diligently, so he declared that he was thankful for the 5. God told Muhammad that each prayer would count tenfold, which would equal the original 50. By the way, the Jewish tradition prescribes prayer 3 times a day toward Jerusalem. Muslims originally prayed towards Jerusalem, but a later revelation from God instructed Muhammad to have his followers pray in the direction of the Kaaba in Mecca, which is how Muslims pray today. They pray in the direction of Mecca. Today, on the site where the temple once stood in Jerusalem until it was destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE, today a shrine called the Dome of the Rock occupies that site. It celebrates or memorializes the rock where Abraham was said to be prepared to sacrifice Isaac, and from which Muhammad ascended into the heavens. After the experience of Isra and Miraj, residents of Yathrib, a city north of Mecca, invited Muhammad to live in their city and establish an Islamic government there. Muhammad and his followers accepted the invitation in the year 622 CE. Their migration is known as the Hijra to Yathrib. Yathrib was subsequently renamed Medina, the city of the Prophet. It is about 200 miles north of Mecca. The Hijra in 622 CE marks the beginning of year 1 of the Islamic calendar. So according to the Islamic calendar, the Hijra is the beginning of year 1. Here you see a map showing Mecca and Medina. In Medina, Muhammad instituted a constitution which later became the basis for Islamic social administration. Meccan leaders feared that Muhammad posed a threat, and conflict broke out between Mecca and Medina. After some initial success, the Muslims in Medina were badly defeated. Eventually, though, Muhammad, who was an expert negotiator, was able to negotiate a truce. And there was peace for a few years. Meanwhile, Muhammad continued expanding his influence in the area of Arabia, and his power continued to grow, his forces grew, and in 630 CE, Muhammad and his followers were able to return to Mecca with such strength that they were not challenged when they approached the city. The Kaaba was purged of idols. Many Meccans converted to Islam. Muhammad eventually returned to Medina, from where he undertook further campaigns to spread Islam. And then 2 years later, in 632 CE, Muhammad made a final pilgrimage to the Kaaba to demonstrate the proper form of worship there. Recognizing that he was at the end of his life, he gave some final instructions to his followers. Prior to his death in 632 CE, Muhammad unfortunately gave no instructions as to who should succeed him. His close friend, Abu Bakr, was elected as the first caliph. The word caliph means successor to the prophet. But this election later caused controversy. Shiite Muslims believe that Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, Ali, who was married to Muhammad's daughter, Fatima, should have been the first caliph. According to one tradition, Muhammad transferred his spiritual light to Fatima before his death, but neither she nor Ali took part in the selection of the caliph because they were busy making funeral arrangements for the prophet. Muhammad's life, as I said earlier, became a model for Muslims to follow. Those who knew him commented on his nobility, his humility, his kindness. The revelations of the Quran speak not of a contemplative life of withdrawal, but of the need for Muslims to fight oppression and corruption and to establish moral order in the world. The Quran contains the revelations Muhammad received, which affirm Allah's unity and also direct life in human society. Muhammad dictated the revelations that he received to scribes, and they were carefully recorded. The revelations were delivered in Arabic, and Muslims believe that the Quran cannot be authoritatively translated into another language. Therefore, although there are translations of the Quran into other languages, including English, if you really want to study the authentic Quran, you must study it in Arabic. Quranic study and recitation became central for Muslims, with recitation understood to have a healing and protective effect. The authoritative written version of the Quran was established around 650 CE, only 18 years after Muhammad had passed. Compare that to Christianity, in which the New Testament took several centuries to be finalized. The Quran is divided into 114 surahs or chapters. Quranic passages may be understood to have multi-layered meanings. Jewish and Christian figures appear frequently in the Quran, for the sacred history of Judaism and Christianity is considered part of Islam. The prophets of those faiths are said to have brought the same message, but human beings added to and distorted Allah's message in both Judaism and Christianity, and the pure monotheism was corrupted. And that is why God called Muhammad to restore pure monotheism, according to Islamic belief. While Muslims revere Jesus as a prophet, they do not accept the notion that he may pardon sin or atone for others' sins, for only Allah can do so. The Quran is understood to be the final and complete revelation of the teachings of all the prophets. Muslims believe that Jesus prophesied the coming of Muhammad when he promised the Paraclete, or the advocate, who would come after him to assist humanity. In the Quran, God is known by the Arabic name Allah. But all people who believe in God and who speak Arabic as their native language call God Allah. So Christians, Arabic Christians, use the word Allah for God, just as Muslims do. The central teachings of Islam are straightforward, at least on the surface. The revelations of the Quran speak not of a contemplative life or a life of withdrawal, but of the need for Muslims to fight oppression and corruption and establish moral order in the world. The most important central teaching is the oneness of Allah and of humanity. So there is one God who created humanity, and all humanity is one. And therefore all humanity should worship and acknowledge and submit to the one God. And that is why Islam considers itself a universal religion, a religion for all humanity, because there is one God and one humanity, and therefore one divine law that applies to everyone. The Shahada is the confession of Islam. It says, "There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah." It is the first statement whispered into the ear of a newborn Muslim infant. Allah's unity is a central focus of Islamic theology. The theme of unity, the chief concern of Muslim theology, extends to all human life and all human social organization. All people everywhere ought to obey God's law and submit to Allah. Islam is considered the universal religion of all peoples, therefore, and Islam honors all prophets as messengers from the one God. So Islam believes in prophethood and in the universality of Islam. All prophets are messengers of the one God, sent when religions decayed into polytheism. The Quran declares that Muhammad, though, is the seal of the prophets, the final and ultimate authority in the prophetic tradition. None of the prophets is divine. All scriptures are to be honored, but only the Quran is considered to be fully authentic, and there will be no other prophets after Muhammad, according to Islamic tradition. Humans must know the fixed laws of Allah's creation and live accordingly. People must believe in and surrender totally to Allah. The two greatest sins involve one's relationship to Allah. Shirk is the association of anything besides Allah with divinity. Shirk is spelled S-H-I-R-K. So to shirk is to associate something besides Allah with divinity. Muslims believe that Christians, when they think of Jesus as the Son of God or as divine, commit the sin of shirk because they associate a human being with divinity. The sin of kufr, K-U-F-R, is ungratefulness to Allah, or atheism, or unbelief. So to fail to be thankful, to be grateful, to be faithful to Allah is kufr. Muslims believe in a spiritual world, in angels and non-physical beings who serve Allah, but who are not to be worshipped. Satan was originally one of the jinn, the J-I-N-N, immaterial beings of fire. Satan was originally one of the jinn. Satan is not submissive because he refused to bow before Adam when commanded by God to do so, and was therefore cursed to live by tempting humanity away from Allah. The jinn are the basis. The jinn are traditional to Arabic culture, and they are the basis for what in Western culture is known as genies. So, you know, as of the Arabian Nights and Aladdin and the Magic Lamp, the genies, those are based in Arabic belief in the jinn. In popular piety in Islam, the tombs of saints become pilgrimage sites, and some strict Muslim reformers object to that kind of veneration. Islam believes in the Last Judgment. The Quran describes bodily resurrection after death, followed by a final judgment at which all will be held accountable for their sins, for their actions in life. Each person's actions will be recorded in a book bound to his or her neck by a chain. Those who are unrepentant, those who are non-believers, those who are hypocrites will be consigned to hell, but only non-believers will remain there for all eternity. While the just, the merciful, will live blissfully in paradise, and the shape of paradise is formed by one's own tendencies in life. Becoming a Muslim is relatively simple. There is no ritual of initiation into the faith, such as baptism or circumcision. The basic spiritual practices for all Muslims are known as the 5 pillars. If a person engages in the 5 pillars with a sincere intent, that person is a Muslim. The first of the 5 pillars is about belief and witness. It is the Shahada. The word Shahada means witness. The Islamic profession of faith: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. The first teaching of Islam is the unity of God and Muhammad's messengership. According to the Quran, believers must tell others about Islam, but cannot use coercion to convert them. The second pillar is Salat. Muslims must pray facing Mecca 5 times daily. When prayers are performed in a mosque, women and men typically pray separately. There may be an imam or prayer leader, but there is no priest, because there is no need for a mediator between human beings and God. Each human being relates to God personally and individually. Prayer should involve both outward performance of the prayers and the rituals and inward concentration and awareness of the presence of Allah. The third pillar of Islam is zakat. It is the act of purification through almsgiving or donating a certain percentage of one's income to charity each year. I believe it is 3%. Zakat does not necessarily need to be given to the mosque, but can be given to any Islamic charity for the good of the Islamic community. It is meant in part to decrease the inequities in wealth that naturally occur in society and to prevent greed. And when one gives one's zakat, the rest of one's wealth is considered to be purified. The fourth pillar is Sawm, or fasting. It is obligatory during the month of Ramadan, which celebrates the event of Muhammad first beginning to receive revelations. Now, the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar, so the month of Ramadan moves throughout the year. It doesn't occur at the same time every year because our calendar is a solar calendar, and the lunar calendar is slightly different. So Ramadan moves a little bit every year, and therefore over time can be in the winter, in the spring, in the summer, in the fall. Sawm, the fasting during Ramadan, is a complete fast. Those who are able must abstain during daylight hours from food, drink, sexual intercourse, smoking. And again, this fast goes from dawn to sunset every day during the month of Ramadan. So one eats a meal before dawn, and then one has nothing, no food, no water, no tobacco, nothing during the day until sunset, when one breaks the fast with the rest of the Islamic community. Many Muslims state that fasting helps one to control negative emotions such as anger and jealousy, but it is quite a rigorous practice. Of course, there are exceptions for the sick, the elderly, women who are pregnant, and others who are allowed to eat or to drink out of medical necessity during the month of Ramadan. The fifth and final of the pillars is the Hajj, or the pilgrimage to Mecca. It is expected that every Muslim during his or her life, if at all possible, will make the pilgrimage to Mecca at least once. And on the pilgrimage to Mecca, there's a series of rituals to commemorate various aspects of Muhammad's life and earlier traditions. Those who embark on the pilgrimage, those who embark on the Hajj and complete it, are known as Hajis. Being a Haji is a badge of pride among Muslims. Islamic law is known as Sharia. In general, Sharia is based on the Quran and the Sunnah. Its dictates are applicable to all areas of life, from diet to inheritance to social justice. It is frequently noted that Sharia gave women rights they did not have in the West until the 19th century. For example, the right to inherit or the right to divorce. Although in many Islamic countries today, a more conservative and traditional patriarchy has eliminated some of those rights for Islamic women. As Islam developed, Sunnis came to believe that laws in the Quran, Hadith, and Sunnah should be continually interpreted by a consensus of opinion and the wisdom of learned men and jurists. Legal scholars are known as the ulama. A legal opinion issued by the ulama is known as a fatwa. And there are different schools of Sharia law. There are different interpretations of Islamic laws. So Sharia is not just one thing. Just as in Western culture there are differences of cultural interpretations and practice and laws from country to country, in Islamic law there are different traditions and different schools. The issue of Muhammad's successor way back at the time of the Prophet's death led to a split between two factions within Islam. The Sunni, who are roughly 80% of the world's Muslims, and the Shia. The Prophet's son-in-law and cousin Ali eventually was elected to be the fourth caliph, but he was assassinated. His son Hussein challenged the fifth caliph's legitimacy and rebelled when the fifth caliph named his own son as successor. Hussein and many of his relatives engaged in a rebellion, and they were massacred at Karbala. At that point, the Shiites, who believed that Ali should have been the first caliph, broke away and established their own line of succession, and they have remained separate ever since. Again, the Sunnis are the majority population of the global Islamic world, and they are the majority in Saudi Arabia, in Egypt, in Turkey, Northern Africa, Pakistan, Afghanistan, the Central Asian countries of the former Soviet Union, and in Indonesia. Syria and Iraq have mixed population of Sunnis and Shia. The major Shia majority is in Iran. And today there is political tension between Saudi Arabia, who is sort of the world leader of the Sunni movement, or at least one of the world leaders of the Sunni movement, and Iran, which is the major Shia majority country. Iran and Saudi Arabia contend with one another for political influence over the Islamic world today. The Sunnis take their name from the Sunnah, that is the traditional literature about the life and teachings of Muhammad. They consider themselves the people of the Sunnah. They emphasize the authority of the Quran and the Hadith and the Sunnah. Their understanding is that Muhammad did not appoint a successor, but rather left this up to the Muslim community, to the Ummah. For Sunnis, the Caliph is the leader of worship and the administrator of the sacred Sharia law. Shia Muslims are devoted to the memory of Muhammad and his close relatives. The festival of Ashura in the month of Muharram commemorates Hussein's martyrdom, when Shias the world over may participate in mourning processions. Shia Muslims revere a succession of imams, prayer leaders, guides, rather than the caliphs. Ali, Hassan, and Hussein were the first three imams, according to Shia belief. 12 are Shias, believe that there are 12 imams historically, 12 important imams who are leaders of the Islamic community, and that the 12th imam is waiting to return as the Mahdi at the day of the resurrection. Well, this is the end of the lecture. I have enjoyed presenting this information to you not only today but throughout the course. I hope that you have learned something throughout this course, and if I can help you in any way, please let me know. Thank you.